2021 Russia, Novosibirsk. On a late, cold March evening, a young man in love was hurrying to congratulate his girlfriend on her 18th birthday. The girl did not return his feelings, and moreover, she had been dating and living with another guy for more than a year. But as we know, hope dies last. Besides, all the people involved in today's situation were still very young, and late, unexpected visits were considered normal in their group. He brought a box of chocolates. You shouldn't arrive empty-handed. When he reached the right apartment, he was about to ring the doorbell, but then he noticed that the door was slightly open. Just in case, he knocked gently, but no one responded. Then he opened the door wider and looked inside. The apartment was dark and quiet. It seemed strange because the apartment was usually noisy, crowded, and lively. On the floor of the dimly lit hallway, there were some dark stains, as if someone had spilled juice or wine here. Hey guys, where are you? Hey guys, are you sleeping? The visitor almost shouted, hoping that the hosts were just tired from partying and were sleeping, having forgotten about the front door. But the only answer was dead silence. The guy shivered. He started to feel creeped out. Wow, what a pigsty you've made here, the guest said out loud, trying to shake off the fear that had come over him. He turned on the light and looked into the kitchen, then the living room, but there was no one there, only the bedroom was left. Of course it wasn't right to intrude on someone else's private life like this, but he was deeply disturbed by the strange brown stains, and the unpleasant, almost metallic smell lingering in the apartment. There was a brownish handprint on the bedroom door. This was starting to look like a scene from a horror movie. The newcomer pushed the door open. The bedroom was in a terrible mess. On the bed, something was lying in an unnatural position. It was hard to tell if it was a doll or a mannequin. What was going on here? Probably some kind of stylish party with creepy kids. Finally, the guy figured it out and sighed with relief. Then he decided to take a closer look at the object lying there to understand exactly what his friends were doing at this cool party. He felt for the light switch on the bedroom wall. What he saw in the bright electric light almost made him throw up. Now he finally understood what exactly was causing that unpleasant smell. This monstrous drama began in Novosibirsk in 2019. A boy and a girl met. They felt a mutual attraction. Fedor, handsome, stylish, charming, from a wealthy family, and the pretty 15-year-old Nastya. She couldn't complain about her family either. Her father is an entrepreneur and her mother holds a good position in a large company. The girl was doing well in school and was planning to enter college after 9th grade. And the guy was a spoiled rich kid, living it up at endless parties and hangouts. Very soon these two started dating. Nastya's parents were either too busy with work or trusted their daughter so much that they didn't really keep track of the company she kept. When they found out she was dating a guy, the family supported her choice, thinking that the young man was quite decent and promising. And other acquaintances also spoke quite positively about Fyodor. He was never short of spending money, dressed in expensive clothes, and always had the latest gadgets. Yes, he was spoiled and self-absorbed, but you couldn't honestly call him a bad person. Because Fedya did well in school, at least until the 10th grade, and overall he was a smart person you could talk to about different things. That was the general opinion. After a short time, Nastya discovered that her perfect prince in every way was messing around with illegal substances. When her friends and acquaintances found out, they started saying, "Why do you need him? A relationship with a junkie won't end well." But she didn't listen to anyone.
So overall, how was their relationship? Did they maybe argue a lot, fight, quarrel, or was there something else going on?
At first, everything was good. She had a great relationship. But when Fedor got hooked on drugs, their relationship went downhill. Nastya was absolutely against using drugs. She tried to save him somehow. I tried to. We both supported him in every way. Tried to help him somehow, but
The girl seemed to be wearing rose-colored glasses. She just didn't want to believe that cheerful, sociable, and outwardly quite normal Fedya was already deeply hooked. Later it turned out that even in Fedya's wealthy family, things were not as smooth as they seemed from the outside. The relationships between the parents and the younger generation, the daughter and the son, were very complicated. Fedya's close friends shared with journalists. His parents put a lot of pressure on him and made demands. He was stressed because of this, and that's how alcohol appeared in his life, and later, illegal substances. It seems that he even started using together with his sister. It turns out that the guy couldn't handle the pressure from his parents and found relief in bad habits. However, Fyodor's unhealthy lifestyle didn't have a noticeable effect on him right away. At first, none of his loved ones noticed any major changes, not even his parents. But as time went on, synthetic drugs began to have a negative impact on the young man's character and behavior. He started to withdraw into himself more and became very nervous. He began to have problems with sleep, memory, and concentration. Kizhin's relatives only realized what was happening in the spring of 2020 when they noticed that valuable things started disappearing from the house. And their beloved son turned into an irritable, twitchy, aggressive person. He was always a sullen individual. Saddened by their discovery, his mother and father immediately suggested that their son go to a good rehab and get anonymous treatment there, but Fedor refused. He said he would handle the problem himself and that he planned to apply to a university in St. Petersburg next summer. But when the results of the Unified State exam came in, it turned out that Kizhin, who used to be a very successful student, had failed all his subjects. He could forget about getting into university, so his parents insisted on treatment at a specialized clinic. This time, Fedor agreed with their arguments and began treatment at the Rehabilitation Center of the National Project Foundation for the Development of Social Programs. But soon, one of the patients complained about the living conditions. In August 2020, law enforcement almost stormed the rehab center. As a result, its management ended up behind bars. More than 20 patients there filed a complaint with the police about harsh conditions and being held against their will. And Fedor told his parents that he had realized everything, reconsidered, and decided to quit drugs. He asked his parents to rent him an apartment and pay for it for a year or two until he gets back on his feet. They probably remembered that Fedor used to steal a little, so they agreed. A friend of Kizhin will later tell journalists, but they set conditions. The son had to find a job somewhere right away, so he wouldn't be a complete burden on his parents. And the guy had to work at a hypermarket to fulfill his part of the deal. He certainly wasn't thrilled about his position as a cashier. "I hate this job. It's for losers," Fedor wrote on social media. As for Nastya, as she had planned, she enrolled in the Novosibirsk City Open College and studied there successfully. Soon after Fedor was discharged from the clinic, she moved in with him. At first, everything was relatively calm between them, but then Kizhin lost control. He started having fits of aggression and withdrawal symptoms, and he took his anger out on his girlfriend. He stole money from her that her parents gave her. He yelled, hit her. Nastya didn't hide her problems, even from classmates she barely knew. "I met her at this college. She was studying in another class in my year. She and Kizhin dated for about a year or two. She told me how he used hard drugs. In fact, he wanted to get her hooked on that stuff too," Nastya's acquaintance Ilya Losev told journalists. That's how Nastya's relationships on social media ended. She called herself Lermontova. And her relationship with Fyodor Kizhin went from romantic to completely unhealthy. The girl didn't hide it, on the contrary. She actively posted on Twitter, which is now X, that is X, in which she shared with her followers the charms of her life with a cruel and overly demanding boyfriend. Moreover, he was suffering from a drug addiction. But to all the advice to dump him for good, she flatly said no. Nastya thought that she loved Fyodor very much. She believed that she would definitely be able to save him. The girl poured out her feelings and worries on social media almost every day. From these posts, it was clear that the relationship between this couple was obviously unhealthy. Nastya was not shy about calling her boyfriend insulting names. She openly wrote that they had a toxic relationship, but at the same time did nothing to get rid of it. Maybe the answer lies in some of the hashtags in her posts, such as codependency. Here are lines from one of her posts. I know that my boyfriend is an abuser and he uses, but I will still stay with him because I love him. I think that I can help him change. But none of her friends or relatives could later clearly explain what exactly Nastya did to try to help him. After being discharged from the clinic, Fedor never went to any addiction specialists or psychologists again. He was also not registered with a psychiatrist. It turns out that the girl didn't go beyond words and didn't really try to help Kijin in any practical way, or maybe she just couldn't. How old was the girl? She was about 16 or 17. What could she have done? Besides, they say that anyone who manages to help their loved ones, in this case relatives, but that's not the point, deserves a monument, because it's hardest for someone close to help another close person, since they just don't listen. Anyone who had parents who were alcoholics or children like that knows this firsthand. One way or another, Nastya's constant presence in Fyodor's life and apartment didn't help the situation, and sometimes even made things worse. The habit of taking money and valuable personal belongings from her friend soon became routine. Kijin didn't hesitate to use Nastya's money to buy his next fix. It turns out the girl was indirectly funding his unhealthy habits herself. By the way, Fyodor also wrote about his life on social media. He spoke harshly and unkindly about Nastya, complained about his hated job, and openly talked about which other illegal substances he would like to try. It's unclear why Nastya's parents didn't react to this situation in any way and allowed her, while still a minor, to live with a drug addict. Well, maybe the girl herself liked to give herself a thrill and then describe her misadventures every day. Or maybe it was simply a codependent relationship that an immature girl couldn't get out of as easily as it might seem at first glance from the outside. Everyone acts so smart when it doesn't concern them personally. Go ahead and write in the comments what you think about this. And as food for thought, I'll mention that she took part in the so-called Weekly Nude Thursday. As part of this flash mob, which used to be trendy among Twitter users, its participants would publicly post their revealing photos every week. It was assumed that people participating in such an event were consciously taking the risk of the consequences associated with posting revealing photos. But who, and more importantly, why is supporting this strange couple? Many who knew the trick asked themselves this question. Perhaps Nastya. Obviously Fyodor spent his entire salary on drugs, but even that wasn't enough for him. Nastya didn't work anywhere at all. It turns out that one of the parents was actually sponsoring the young people, and it couldn't have been any other way. But at the same time, later on, both couples refused to comment on this point. And Fedor, meanwhile, was behaving more and more aggressively with each passing day. Nastya's classmates later said that she often came to class with bruises, and when asked about them, she would just brush it off and say in a casual tone that she had fought with her boyfriend. Everyone who knew them was aware that Fedor tried to get his girlfriend hooked on illegal substances in hopes of achieving the long-awaited harmony in their relationship. After all, as they say, a sober person can't understand a drunk one. On the eve of Nastya's 18th birthday, Fedor mentioned to one of his friends that he was planning to do something special that day. This phrase didn't raise any suspicions. They thought he was talking about some kind of surprise. Well, at most, they thought it was just another attempt to involve the girl in his bad lifestyle. So, still filled with romantic expectations, Anastasia was waiting on her 18th birthday for some kind of special surprise from her boyfriend. But Fyodor behaved as usual and seemed to have no idea what day it was. Well, he couldn't have forgotten my birthday, Nastya thought sadly as she typed another message to her friends. She complained to them about her boyfriend's forgetfulness, nervously checking the time on her phone every now and then. It was already late, and Fedya had promised her a surprise in advance, just the two of them. Maybe he changed his mind, the girl asked herself, nervously biting her lip. Tired of her troubling thoughts, Nastya shyly hugged her boyfriend from behind by the shoulders and reminded him, "And who was it that promised me a surprise?" "What surprise?" Fedya snapped back nervously. He hadn't been looking well lately. A pale, gaunt face, sunken cheeks, dark circles under his eyes. Sitting half upright on the bed, he nervously fidgeted with his fingers and shook his leg. All of this had long since become a habit for him. "Oh, come on," Nastya pouted. "Did you forget what day it is today? What the hell kind of day is it today? Just the same damn day as all the others. Actually, it's my birthday right now, and you promised to surprise me, didn't you?" "Well, apparently as always you forgot, or just didn't care. Ah, right, you have a hole in your head. Finally got through to your brain." His cloudy eyes started to shine. "That's right. This needs to be celebrated properly." Fyodor started thinking about something. The effort of the thinking process, which was already difficult for him, showed on his face. Finally, he said, "Nastya, I'm completely broke right now, but I'll definitely pay you back. I'm asking for a good cause, for a surprise." Nastya looked at him doubtfully. He had lied to her so many times that she had lost count, but she so desperately wanted to believe him. She wished that for once he would, for once, stop thinking about the damn junk he keeps shooting up and think about her instead, so devoted and gentle, who doesn't leave him no matter what. "I have 5,000, but that's all I have left," his girlfriend warned him. "Only 5? What am I supposed to buy with that pocket change? I really don't have any more?" "All right, I'll figure something out," the clearly upset guy muttered through his teeth. Nastya transferred him the money, and he got ready and left. He was gone for several hours, and all that time Nastya was on pins and needles. Finally, the front door creaked. Fedya was standing on the threshold, for once quite pleased. Nastya beamed in response. "Just a sec, 5 seconds," he said, and went to the kitchen for some reason. A few more agonizing minutes passed. Finally, Fyodor returned to the bedroom with a tray. There was only an empty plate on it and a flower folded from a napkin. Next to it was a small packet with white powder. "What is this?" Nastya asked anxiously and looked at the guy in confusion. "Surprise," he said with exaggerated cheerfulness. "Are you kidding me?" The girl looked at him angrily. "No, wait, don't get mad. I'm just suggesting you try it at least once. It's such a thrill, trust me. You've never felt anything like this in your life before. Since you're already a big girl, you can give in to temptation at least once, right? Listen, everyone who spins stories about drugs just hasn't tried them themselves. Do you know how much new stuff you discover on meth? You can be anyone you want, or even anything you want, for real. It's just like playing with VR goggles, only the immersion is complete." A hint of doubt flashed in the girl's eyes. She had never looked at it from that angle before. And really, how can you judge something without trying it? And Anastasia suddenly decided to conduct an experiment and become a voluntary test subject. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's try to do it together." Fyodor's eyes widened. He thought she would start freaking out as usual. She would throw a tantrum and they'd fight, but this was unexpected. This was how he should have persuaded her. Soon the couple took it and started waiting for it to kick in. Nastya looked around with interest. Her head was spinning. Everything was like in a fog. Vague outlines of familiar objects floated before her eyes, but now they looked completely different. Fyodor was watching her closely. She looked around with surprise, even examining her own hands as if she was seeing them for the first time. So it had kicked in, he thought. While Nastya was distracted by the new sensations, he went to the kitchen. She only had 5,000 left. The guy muttered angrily, opening his friend's banking app on her phone. Greedy bitch. As soon as she heard it was for a surprise, she suddenly had money. But when I asked her for money for a fix, she said she didn't have any. Fedya slammed his hand on the table in rage. The box with kitchen utensils tipped over, and all sorts of spoons and ladles spilled out of it. The guy's gaze slid over the cold metal. He picked up a steel chef's knife and turned it over in his hands. A plan formed in his mind. Fedor came back from the kitchen with a mysterious look. Nastya had already admired the changed surroundings enough and now reached out to her beloved to hug him. The guy leaned toward her, keeping one hand behind his back, and the dazed girl buried her nose in his shoulder and mumbled something. With a sharp movement, he shoved her arms off him, then started stabbing her with the knife he had been hiding behind his back. Nastya hardly resisted, because under the influence of the drug she barely understood what was happening. Everything felt like a dream. But people don't die in dreams, and there's no point in doing anything. And the executioner's hand kept rising and falling, again and again, slicing through the yielding flesh with a kitchen knife that was far too dull. Did she ever realize what exactly her beloved was doing to her? Apparently, at some point she did realize what was happening. After all, according to Kijin's own testimony, before her death, Nastya begged him for mercy, hugged him, and even tried to calm him down, promising that everything would be all right. "Don't! Stop! Please!" she begged with slurred speech, but Fedor had no intention of stopping. He decided that this bitch had to die today. She had been bothering him for a long time. She posted all sorts of crap about him, shamed him in front of everyone, stole and skimmed money. But here was the problem. Despite dozens of knife wounds, Nastya stubbornly refused to die. "Bitch! He's just as stupid as you," Fyodor exclaimed and continued stabbing his bloody victim. He aimed mainly at the head and neck to make sure he finished the job. The mangled flesh on Nastya's neck finally gave way. The knife slid deep inside. The girl felt it too. "Goodbye." That's all she managed to say to her tormentor in the end. Seeing that Nastya finally wasn't moving anymore, Fedor threw the knife aside and immediately rushed to Nastya's purse where she had a wallet with cash. Maybe there's a stash in there. But in the wallet there was only some small change, not enough for a proper dose, or even to buy some decent food. Then Kijin transferred the remaining money to his own card. Nastya had 3,000 left in her account. Not enough. It seemed kind of pointless. Fyodor understood that he needed to get out of there before someone came and caught him at the scene of the crime. But there was still some meth left in the Ziploc bag, and the temptation was too great. Well, it would be a shame to let it go to waste, he decided, and started preparing the remaining dose to get another hit. When the meth kicked in, the urge to quickly leave the scene of the crime disappeared. Then he took his phone and started texting all his friends and acquaintances. The first on the list was his old friend named Sergey. "Sergey, goodbye. I took someone's life," Kijin wrote in a messaging app. His friend didn't believe him. "What? Are you kidding?" "How?" Fedya opened up. "I've been hooked on meth for a year and a half. I had another relapse. This time the withdrawal was something special. I came up with a plan to get another fix." But Sergey was still doubtful, because Fedya could hallucinate all kinds of things when he was high. "Where's the body?" the guy asked. "Just in case. It's lying on my couch." "I killed Nastya. How? How did it happen? Why? This is just surreal. She tries to hug me, and I have a knife behind my back. I took her life to get to the money faster and get another fix. I didn't believe I was capable of such an act, but meth turns you into an animal. Just imagine how surreal that is. A corpse is in the middle of the room and I'm shooting up." As proof, Fedya sent his friend a photo with Nastya's corpse in the background. Sergey's jaw just dropped in horror, but he still hoped it was just a well-staged prank. And Fedor kept sharing gruesome details. The knife was dull. Nastya took about 5 minutes to die. At first, she tried to persuade me, begged me not to do it, and then, when I cut her neck badly, she said goodbye. "If that's true, we should tell her parents," his friend carefully remarked. "Imagine, Nastya's mother has already lost a second child," Fedor replied. And indeed, the eldest son in the family died a few years ago. Nastya was the only comfort left for her parents. Next on Fyodor's list was a certain Tanya. She lived in Kemerovo and had been friends for years. He invited himself over for a few days, and the girl gladly agreed. Then Fedor wrote to another acquaintance of his, this time from Novosibirsk. I did something stupid. Goodbye. What happened? I did something to Nastya. At first his friend didn't believe it either, thinking it was some kind of stupid prank. But Fedor insisted it was true. I'm going to Kemerovo to see my acquaintance. I'll spend a few days there, and then I'll decide what to do next. Packing Nastya's laptop and iPhone into his backpack, Fedor first went to the pawn shop. He needed money for the trip. Then he caught a taxi, but on the way, something unexpected happened. The taxi got into a minor accident. This is exactly what worked in the police's favor. Even more videos. Visit Boosty if you're in Russia and Patreon if you're not in Russia. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube. The links are below the video. The mutilated body of Nastya was discovered on March 7, 2021 in an apartment on Kashurnikova Street in the Dzerzhinsky district of Novosibirsk by the same friend who decided to congratulate her on her birthday. That's how the police found out about what happened, and an investigative team urgently went to the crime scene. The identity of the key suspect was established within an hour. Detectives assumed that another quarrel between the often feuding young people ended in a bloody showdown. Judging by the evidence found, under the influence of synthetic drugs, the young man gave his girlfriend such an unforgettable gift for her 18th birthday. Soon, forensic experts were collecting evidence at the crime scene, and detectives uncovered many shocking details about this murder. The ordinary table knife really turned out to be too dull. Therefore, despite the numerous wounds, Nastya did not die immediately. Why the girl didn't scream much during it is a big question, since according to the perpetrator and the experts, she was conscious the whole time. It is quite likely that Miev affected her pain threshold in such a way. This substance has strong stimulating and empathogenic effects. As it turned out later, Fedor stayed in the apartment with Nastya's body for almost a whole day. Those he messaged while high immediately started sharing their conversations with him among their acquaintances. Someone tried to find Nastya's parents' contacts to get in touch with them and tell them about the messages, but they were in no hurry to report it to the police. After the car Kizhin was riding in got into an accident, he decided to hitchhike to Kemerovo, and a truck driver agreed to give him a ride. At that time, the police had already contacted the woman from Kemerovo whom Fedor was going to visit and asked her to arrange a meeting with him at the shopping mall where he was eventually detained. It took only 4 hours to catch him. After that, the detainee was taken to the station. They seized his phone, which contained messages with information important to the investigation. A crime scene reenactment was conducted with Kizhin, during which he confirmed his statements and gave a detailed account of the circumstances of the crime. Fedor was then taken into custody and sent to a pre-trial detention center. After the tragedy, mutual friends and acquaintances of the couple began posting farewell messages. Nastya is the sweetest girl in the world. She was bright and open. Angel is the word that describes her perfectly. And he is a complete piece of crap as a person. All the gold jewelry and phones were pawned over and over again for a fix, but she thought everything would change. They had a complicated relationship. He sold his own things for a fix and took her life. But there were also those who believed that Nastya and Fedor deserved each other. That's exactly why they stayed together, despite all the obvious downsides of their relationship. Here's what the neighbors said about the deceased. And let me remind you, neighbors are usually some random old ladies. And considering that in cities it's not customary to greet or know your neighbors, of course, as soon as you don't go over to your neighbors for tea, you're immediately considered very strange and reserved. And honestly, interviewing neighbors in the 2020s about what kind of person someone was seems to me like the most pointless and useless thing in the world. But nevertheless, here's a quote from one of the neighbors. I'll put it this way, they were two of a kind. They were always making noise, playing loud music and arguing. She was no less than him, just as bold and rude as he was. It doesn't quite fit with Angelina. Таким образом, которые создали в своих прощальных словах Настины друзья, ну, во-первых, на то они и друзья, а во-вторых, на то о покойных Nevertheless, it's proof that Lermontova herself was far from being an angel. Listening to her, Fyodor's own sister, Darya, who was friends with Nastya, later told the story like this. He lied to her. Their relationship was complicated. He used to beat her. I have messages where Nastya complains about violence and humiliation. I tried to help her, but she refused. I loved my brother very much too, but he treated me terribly. The psychologist explained to me that he was manipulating me and could have scammed me out of money. And here's what his best friend, as she called herself, said about the cabin in an interview right after his arrest. When I met Fyodor, he was a normal guy. He had an addiction, but I didn't notice any particularly strange behavior. I never expected it. His mental state was shaken because of the substances. Lately, he had thoughts of taking his own life. Fyodor even left a suicide note for Nastya. We helped him as much as we could. He even said goodbye to me, said he had done something foolish. At first, I thought he had used something again, but it turned out he had taken Nastya's life. It seemed like a joke to me. I was prepared for Fedor to possibly take his own life, but I wasn't prepared for him to take someone else's. After his arrest, Fedor immediately confessed to everything. During the interrogation, he said that before the crime, there was an argument between him and the victim. We used drugs and went to bed. Then a verbal conflict arose between us, which later turned into, well, not exactly a fight, but yes, a small scuffle. And in the end, I grabbed a knife. Kizin stated that the reason for the killing was a domestic dispute, and all because when you're lying in bed, you should be dealing with things other than domestic conflicts. Nevertheless, according to Kizin, the day before, the girl posted on social media that Fedor has a non-traditional sexual orientation which is prohibited in Russia, and he demanded that she delete the post, but the girl refused. And by the way, those words were not without a grain of truth. Nastya really did publish a post claiming that Fedor allegedly provided paid intimate services to another guy in order to get a dose. However, after the crime, Kizin wrote something completely different to his friends. There wasn't a word about the ill-fated post. On the other hand, it could also be that Fedor was simply hiding his true motive. For example, Nastya's friends reported another mysterious detail. A month before her death, the girl said that she was receiving threats. So, on February 14, she wrote that someone had slipped her a note with the words, "You will die." Who exactly did this was never found out, but after her death, friends suggested that it could have been Fedor. The investigation into the criminal case regarding the death of Anastasia P. She goes by Lermontova on social media, but in sources like these, she's referred to as Nastya P. It was completed in October 2021. The court proceedings began on November 16th. The press service of the Novosibirsk Region Prosecutor's Office reported that, according to investigators, the accused was under the influence of an illegal substance, MEF. With the aim of obtaining money to purchase prohibited substances, he took the life of a girl with particular cruelty. Showing exceptional heartlessness, the perpetrator inflicted at least 80 wounds, 5 stabs with a knife and an unidentified hard blunt object to the victim's head, neck, face, and hands, of which at least 48 knife wounds were to the head and neck. Fedor Kizin was charged under Article 162 of the Russian Criminal Code. Murder committed with particular cruelty, combined with robbery, for which he faced from 8 to 20 years or life imprisonment. At the first court session, Fedor appeared quite lively and confident. He looked with interest at the people who came to attend his hearing, and only on Nastya's mother did he try not to let his gaze linger. The young man admitted his guilt only partially, and insisted that the cause of the tragedy was not at all what the prosecutors claimed. The defendant was supported by his lawyer, Pavel Luskan. He stated that Kizin became a victim of media hype, which led to negative consequences in the form of an excessively aggravated charge that did not correspond to the case materials. However, lawyers always earn their fees by trying to present their clients in the best possible light, so there's nothing surprising here, it's just their job. Nastya's mother did not agree with the prosecutor's position, for example, with the claim that the conflict between her daughter and Fedor happened against the backdrop of accusations. She believed that Kijin forced her daughter to take it, threatening her with violence. The final hearing was scheduled for the end of August 2022. In the courthouse corridor, the relatives and friends of the deceased were waiting for the trial. Nastya's parents did not want to talk to journalists. The Kijins also refused. Only Maria Shin, a representative of the Siberian Regional Prosecutor's Office, provided information about the case to journalists before the hearing began. The prosecution has proposed that the court impose a sentence of 18 years of imprisonment in a high-security correctional facility. When Fedor was brought into the courtroom, he also refused to speak with journalists and wore a medical mask throughout the entire process. The judge allowed filming only during the announcement of the reasoning part of the verdict. Fedor Kijin was sentenced to 35 years on August 1, 2022. The judge listed all the numerous bodily injuries that the defendant inflicted on the victim. At the pre-trial investigation stage, the accused partially admitted guilt and said that he only wanted to cause the deceased injuries. He said that around 2 a.m., the effect of meth wore off, and this always caused him anxiety and aggression. The parents found out about what happened from one of their son's friends, to whom Fedor had sent photos of Nastya's body. The defendant was officially diagnosed with stimulant addiction. Wounds and injuries were found on Fedor's forearms, and Anastasia had numerous bruises that had formed no more than 5 days before her death, as well as fresh abrasions and contusions. When she was being stabbed, Nastya tried to defend herself by covering up with her hands, so they were completely covered in wounds. A forensic psychiatric examination determined that Kijin does not suffer from any mental disorders, and his addiction did not prevent him from understanding and controlling his actions. The judge concluded that the defendant had direct intent to take a life. The court regarded Kijin's claim that he had no thoughts of taking a life with particular cruelty as a defense strategy. The court did not establish a motive of personal gain. In the judge's opinion, Fedor decided to steal Nastya's belongings and money only after he had taken her life. Therefore, the court found that the killing occurred due to personal animosity. The version that the attack happened because Nastya refused to give Fedor money for a new dose did not hold up to scrutiny. Most likely, he made this up so that the crime would have a motive others would find more acceptable. When passing the sentence, the judge took into account mitigating circumstances, his voluntary confession, active remorse, positive references for Kijin, lack of a criminal record, and his health condition. An aggravating factor was that Fedor was under the influence of meth at the time of the crime. Apparently, he is guilty for a reason. During the investigation, Fedor's friends described him as an extremely indifferent person with no empathy. Even his own sister said that her brother is like a stone. After all, even during the court hearing, Fedor read his apology to Nastya's parents from a piece of paper written in advance by his lawyer. He couldn't even find a couple of his own words for the people whose only child he killed. Kijin's sister said after the trial, "In my brother's case, it wasn't just about drugs. It's not that he had any mental disorders, that's not officially stated anywhere, but I suspect he has antisocial personality disorder. He had a ruthless and secretive character. Lately, he was even hiding from his friends." The lawyers, his parents and Nastys agreed with these words, adding that according to medical reference books and psychotherapists, such psychological qualities as conscience, shame, compassion, honesty, and remorse are foreign to him. Male psychopaths do not feel attachment to the opposite sex. They constantly lie and manipulate. People with psychopathy do not show pity or compassion. Their emotions are often feigned. Most likely Kizin was like that too. In general, Nastya appears as a classic example of a codependent person. Nastya, in her romantic relationships, blinded by her initial feelings and belief in her romantic ideal, consciously ignored all the warning signs. She openly wrote on social media about abuse from Fedor, about his addiction, about him stealing her money, but at the same time did nothing to end the relationship. Her behavior is characterized by deep psychological dependence and the belief that through her love and sacrifices she can save her partner. This illusion turned out to be stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. Her personality was contradictory. On one hand, her friends described her as a bright angel, but on the other hand, her neighbors and her own actions suggested otherwise. Participation in nude flash mobs, provocative posts, and using substances together on that fateful night paint the picture of a thrill-seeking girl who herself liked to chase thrills and live on the edge. This duality makes her a tragic figure. She was both a victim of circumstances and manipulation, and an active participant in self-destructive relationships. The parents on both sides, despite their outward well-being, demonstrated passivity and inattentiveness. Nastya's parents, knowing that Fedor was a drug addict and that things were a mess, allowed their daughter, who wasn't even 18. Fedor's parents, in turn, realizing the problem, did try to get him treated, but in the end they gave in to him, renting him an apartment and financing his lifestyle, which was actually a form of codependency and enabling. But on the other hand, not everyone is as smart as a duck or a qualified psychologist to know how to properly handle such situations. The guys at the club knew too, but they're not her mom or dad. Besides, helping people like Nastya isn't easy. Not everyone can do it, and frankly, very few people are able to. You really have to want to help a lot to do it. Fedka Kijin is a classic example of a person with pronounced psychopathic traits, antisocial personality disorder, made worse by a severe addiction to illegal substances. The court found him sane, which indicates his ability to understand his actions and control them. But at the same time, he was unfamiliar with feelings like conscience, compassion, honesty, and remorse, all those bright, kind, eternal things. Deep emotional emptiness and feigned emotions, that's what you can see in Kijin. Fedor's motives were complex, although a self-serving motive was considered. The court determined that the intent to steal arose later, and the main reason was personal animosity. Particular cruelty indicates uncontrollable rage, sadistic tendencies, and a complete disregard for the value of another person's life. Mephedrone removed the last barrier and acted as a catalyst, but not the original source of his cruelty. Fedor manipulated those around him and lied to his sister, trying to present herself in a better light, either as a victim of the media frenzy or as a person who committed a crime because of an offensive post. During the proceedings, the victim's side filed a claim for compensation of material damages in the amount of 344,000 rubles and moral damages totaling 10 million. After examining all the circumstances of the case and the evidence presented, the court sentenced Fedor. Fedor Kijin was sentenced to 15 years in a high-security penal colony and was ordered to compensate material damages of 338,000 rubles. The moral damages for the death of the young woman were assessed at 1 million. Anastasia's funeral was not covered by the media. Only Dasha Kijina later said that the farewell was beautiful. All the expenses were covered by Fyodor's parents, since Nastya's parents didn't have any money. However, it wasn't done wholeheartedly. By court decision, the defendant was required to reimburse the mother of the deceased for her daughter's funeral expenses and the representative's services. After the trial, Fedor tried to start corresponding with his sister, but she did not support his desire to communicate. In July 2025, new information about Kijin appeared. Without serving a year in the colony, he signed a contract and volunteered to go to the front line. Just 6 months later, he was pardoned and returned to Novosibirsk. After spending some time at home, he moved to St. Petersburg, just like he once wanted. There, the former convict took advantage of a special quota for frontline participants and in 2024 was admitted to the Baltic State Technical University named after Ustinov. Kijin successfully completed 2 semesters, for which in July 2025 he was even awarded a letter of appreciation for his good academic performance. The award was personally presented by the university's rector, Alexander Evgenyevich Shashurin, as confirmed by photos on the university's website. But attentive internet users quickly recognized Kijin and a commotion arose. When, amid public dissatisfaction, journalists contacted the press office to clarify the situation, the news about the award ceremony and the photos immediately disappeared from the university's website. The university's press office briefly stated this student concealed his criminal record and was expelled at the end of the 2nd semester. As a result, Kijin did not serve even a small part of the sentence he was given for a brutal crime and successfully lived off public funds. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the channel. There are already a lot of them and you probably haven't seen them all yet.